Imagine a continent larger than Europe, buried under ice, so deep it hides mountains taller than the Alps and lakes bigger than some seas. Imagine a place that has kept its secrets for millions of years, sealed away in frozen silence, where no permanent human settlement has ever survived. That place is Antarctica, Earth's final frontier, not just of geography, but of mystery. For centuries, maps showed it as a blank space. Explorers risked everything to reach it. Scientists today still admit that we understand more about the surface of Mars than we do about the world locked beneath Antarctica's ice. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep, where we move slowly through history's most fascinating corners. Tonight, we won't only talk about expeditions and flags. We'll ask what Antarctica has been hiding, why nations have fought to control it, and why scientists believe it may hold answers about Earth's past and future that no other place can reveal. Before we begin, take a moment to gently tap the like button and subscribe so you can return anytime for more calm journeys into the forgotten stories of history. Now, let us step into the white silence together, not just to recount who sailed south, but to uncover the secrets buried under the ice.
If you were to look at a globe today, your eyes would eventually fall to the very bottom, where a massive white shape dominates the southern pole, Antarctica. To us, it appears familiar, mapped in detail by satellites, outlined by textbooks, and reduced in the classroom to the coldest place on Earth. But imagine how it looked to the generations before us, who stared at maps where nothing but blank parchment stretched across the bottom of the world. To them, Antarctica was not a continent, it was a question, a riddle, a place that existed only as a possibility. For over 2,000 years, scholars, sailors, and dreamers believed there must be a great southern land. Why? Because balance seemed to demand it. If continents filled the northern hemisphere, then surely something enormous must exist in the south to keep the world steady. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. And here lies the first mystery, a continent imagined into existence long before it was ever seen. How could people with no ships capable of cutting through polar ice, with no telescopes or satellites, insist that something vast lay hidden at the end of the earth? Was it pure philosophy, or fragments of forgotten knowledge passed down in whispers? Ancient maps add to the intrigue. Take the famous Piri Reis map of 1513, drawn by an Ottoman admiral, which appears to show a southern coastline remarkably similar to parts of Antarctica. Modern historians debate its accuracy, but the mere possibility raises eyebrows. How could a 16th century map contain lines resembling the outline of a continent that Europeans would not set eyes on for 3 more centuries? Some argue it is coincidence. Others claim it combines fragments of earlier charts, and still others suggest that forgotten voyages reached further south than we admit. Whatever the explanation, the map fuels one of the enduring fascinations with Antarctica, the suspicion that it has always been half known, half hidden. And Antarctica does seem to invite such suspicions. Beneath its ice lie mountains as tall as the Alps and valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, all invisible to the naked eye. Modern radar has revealed subglacial lakes sealed away for millions of years, waters that may contain forms of life unlike anything we have seen. But imagine standing in the 19th century, long before these discoveries, staring at an endless horizon of white. To those early sailors, Antarctica was a silent wall, a barrier between what could be known and what must remain hidden. They describe the ice as alive, groaning, cracking, splitting into monstrous bergs that drifted like floating fortresses. It was not merely geography. It was theater. The ice itself seemed to resist human intrusion. What makes Antarctica different from every other continent is its refusal to yield its secrets easily. Africa, Asia, the Americas, all were mapped and crossed by empires within centuries of contact. Antarctica resisted. Its silence swallowed the names of sailors who tried to reach it. Its storms destroyed ships without leaving a trace. Even when land was sighted, fog and shifting ice made it vanish again like a mirage. In this way, Antarctica became less a place than a presence, an unbroken horizon of white where human ambition met its natural limit. And because it resisted, it became irresistible. For centuries, stories multiplied. Some insisted the southern continent was a paradise, rich with forests and minerals waiting to be claimed. Others believed it was barren, cursed, a wasteland no human could inhabit. Both ideas drew expeditions southward. But the truth was stranger. Antarctica was both everything and nothing, a continent the size of Europe and Australia combined, yet offering no soil to farm, no trees to cut, no obvious wealth to harvest. Instead, its value lay hidden under the ice. That hidden value was not only material, but symbolic. To plant a flag in Antarctica was to say, we have reached the ultimate limit. In the Age of Empire, when most of the world had been claimed, Antarctica was the last frontier, the one place where blankness still covered maps. And with blankness comes imagination. Nations dreamed of secret resources buried beneath the glaciers. Scientists speculated about climates of the past recorded in layers of ice. Adventurers imagined fame waiting at the pole. But here is where the deeper mystery lies. Even as we uncovered more of Antarctica, its secrets only grew. Each discovery seemed to raise new questions. When explorers first found fossils of ancient ferns and tree trunks locked in the ice, they realized this land had once been green, warm, and alive. What force could transform a lush continent into a frozen desert? When scientists drilled into the ice and found layers preserving traces of air from hundreds of thousands of years ago, they realized Antarctica was not only a land, but a time machine, holding records of Earth's climate across millennia. Was it possible, then, that beneath this silence lay warnings about our own future? And still today, Antarctica resists full understanding. Modern satellites can peer across its surface, radar can probe beneath its ice, but vast regions remain untouched, unseen by human eyes. Some subglacial lakes have never been drilled. Some mountain ranges remain barely mapped. Even the continent's political status, claimed by many, owned by none, adds to its aura of secrecy. It is the only place on Earth where no nation is sovereign, where a treaty holds a fragile peace, and where science is the only currency of power. As a Harvard professor might remind his students in a dim lecture hall, history is not just about what we know. It is about the mysteries that remain, the silences that shape our imagination as much as the facts. Antarctica is not only a continent, it is the greatest unanswered question on our planet. It is proof that even in the 21st century, when satellites map Mars and probes orbit Jupiter, we still have a place on Earth that keeps its secrets locked away. And so when we speak of Antarctica, we are not merely recounting voyages or drawing coastlines. We're standing at the edge of the known world, staring into a vast whiteness that asks us, what else remains hidden? What stories has the ice buried? What truths about our planet, and perhaps about ourselves, lie frozen, waiting for those patient and brave enough to search? This is the beginning of Antarctica's hidden history. Not the story of dates and names alone, but the story of a continent that has always been more than geography. It is the riddle at the bottom of the globe, the secret under the ice, the reminder that mystery is not gone from our world.
The first time human eyes caught sight of the edges of Antarctica, what they saw was not a welcoming coastline or a fertile land ready for settlement. What they saw was a mirage of whiteness, a wall of ice so immense and so alien that it looked less like a place on Earth and more like another world. Those fleeting glimpses from ships tossed by gales in the early 19th century did not reveal details. They revealed only an impression so stark and unsettling that it immediately sparked questions far beyond geography. Imagine being a sailor in 1820, peering through freezing spray, your ship's timbers groaning in seas heavier than any you had ever known. Suddenly, through mist and snow, there looms a cliff of ice, stretching farther than the eye can see, glowing with strange blue light beneath the sun. You cannot land. You cannot measure. You cannot even be certain what you are seeing. And yet, you know you have glimpsed something colossal. When those sailors returned to port and told their stories, they did not simply describe a coastline. They spoke of a wall that seemed alive, groaning as it cracked, shifting like a fortress that refused to be entered. To listeners back home, this was not just discovery. This was the beginning of a legend. Almost immediately, Antarctica drew to itself the myths and anxieties of the age. Was this the legendary Terra Australis, imagined for centuries as a land of balance and riches? If so, why did it appear to be nothing but frozen death? Or was it something else entirely? A continent the Earth had hidden away like a secret chapter in its history book. From the start, Antarctica became fertile ground for speculation. Some said it was the remains of a once tropical world, flash frozen by catastrophe. Fossils of ferns and tree trunks, later found in the ice, seemed to confirm that it had once been green. Others went further, suggesting that entire civilizations might lie buried under the glaciers, waiting to be uncovered. For those who craved mystery, the ice itself became an accomplice because it concealed everything. Unlike other continents, whose landscapes revealed themselves readily, Antarctica erased evidence under layers of frozen silence. And when evidence is erased, imagination rushes in to fill the gap. One of the most persistent legends was that of secret maps. The Puri Rice map of 1513, often cited by enthusiasts, appeared to show a southern coastline resembling Antarctica, drawn centuries before its official discovery. How could this be? Some scholars argued that the map was a collage of older charts, fragments passed down from forgotten sailors. Others whispered of ancient mariners who had once seen Antarctica in a warmer age, when its coasts were free of ice. Serious historians remain cautious, yet the idea lingers, feeding the suspicion that knowledge of Antarctica existed long before its supposed discovery. The mere possibility was enough to transform Antarctica from a blank land into a mystery. As explorers pressed closer in the 19th century,
Their reports added fuel to these speculations. They described seas choked with icebergs, some as large as cities, breaking apart with thunderous roars. They recorded skies filled with strange lights, the aurora australis, flickering green and red across the horizon like the breath of some hidden fire. They brought back stories of animals found nowhere else, penguins that walked upright like people, seals that bellowed like monsters, whales that surged from beneath ice floes. To ordinary readers back home, these tales blurred the line between science and myth. Was Antarctica simply a frozen wilderness, or was it something more exotic, more primeval? By the mid-19th century, Antarctica had already become a canvas for conspiracy. Some writers claimed that governments knew more about it than they admitted, hoarding knowledge of resources or ancient ruins. Others suggested that its remoteness made it the perfect hiding place for secrets, whether of nature or of human design. Because so few people could actually go there, and because those who did often returned with vague or contradictory reports, Antarctica remained an open stage for speculation. Even in serious scientific circles, mysteries abounded. Why was the ice so thick? What force could bury mountains and valleys beneath miles of frozen water? Did lakes exist below the glaciers, sealed off from the surface for millions of years? Every question carried with it a sense of awe and unease. Unlike other continents, which could be explored and mapped step by step, Antarctica remained stubbornly closed. Its surface gave no answers. Its interior was inaccessible. It was, in effect, a riddle carved in ice. And then there were the whispers that reached far beyond science. In the early 20th century, when the world reeled from war and new technologies, Antarctica became entangled in stories of secret bases and hidden powers. Some claimed that during the Second World War, navies had scouted its coasts for strategic advantage. Others went further, spinning tales of hidden fortresses buried under the ice. Few of these claims held evidence, but that hardly mattered. The very fact that Antarctica was so difficult to access made it fertile ground for speculation. If secrets existed anywhere, surely they existed there. To this day, Antarctica remains a magnet for such ideas. When scientists drill into the ice and discover air bubbles older than humanity, people wonder what else might be hidden there. When radar reveals mountain ranges beneath the ice sheet, people ask if valleys or structures could lie concealed. When satellites detect unexplained magnetic anomalies, imaginations leap to ancient civilizations or secret technologies. The truth, of course, is usually geological, yet the sense of mystery persists because Antarctica does not easily give up its secrets. What is fascinating is how quickly these mysteries appeared, almost from the very first moment humans laid eyes on the continent. Other lands were explored, settled, and absorbed into maps within decades. Antarctica, by contrast, seemed to design to resist understanding. It offered no open harbors, no fertile soil, no welcoming forests. It offered only silence, cold, and the promise that something lay beneath. That promise was enough to ignite centuries of speculation. And so, from its first sightings, Antarctica was never merely geography. It was mythology. It was the embodiment of the unknown. The place on Earth where the blank spaces of the map did not disappear, but multiplied. For every coastline charted, there were 1,000 questions left unanswered. For every glacier named, there were mysteries about what lay below. Antarctica was, and remains, the one place where imagination and science walk side by side, each chasing what the ice refuses to show. This is why, even today, Antarctica holds a special grip on us. We live in a world where satellites map every city, where the internet delivers images of every street, where mysteries seem fewer and fewer. But Antarctica resists. Its secrets are not just in its past, but in its present, locked in ice that is still shifting, still hiding, still refusing to be fully known. From the very first glimpse in the early 19th century to the latest scans by modern radar, the story is the same. Antarctica is the greatest cover-up, not because someone hides it, but because the Earth itself has buried it under silence.
By the closing decades of the 19th century, Antarctica had already transformed from a ghostly outline on maps into something more substantial. Sailors had seen its ice cliffs, hunters had swarmed its sub-Antarctic islands, and a handful of daring expeditions had even touched its frozen shores. Yet what truly captured the world's imagination in this period was not just the thrill of planting flags or naming mountains. It was the dawning realization that Antarctica might hold scientific secrets unlike any other place on Earth. In those years, a new idea began to take root, that this frozen land was not merely the end of the map, but a vast natural laboratory sealed in ice, waiting to reveal truths about the planet itself. To understand the shift, imagine the mood of the world in the 1870s and 1880s. Steamships were shrinking oceans. Telegraphs were connecting continents in minutes. Darwin's ideas about evolution were challenging how people thought about nature. In this age of restless curiosity, Antarctica stood out as the last untouched frontier. It was the one place where the questions outnumbered the answers, where every scrap of information about winds, currents, rocks, or birds felt like a clue in a larger puzzle. To the emerging scientific community, Antarctica was no longer just a distant curiosity. It was the key to understanding Earth's climate, its geology, even its history of life. One of the first real sparks came from the Challenger expedition, 1872 to 1876, a British scientific voyage that circled the globe studying the deep oceans. Though it never landed on Antarctica, it sailed far enough south to collect crucial data on water temperatures, sea life, and ocean currents near the polar circle. What it found was startling. The Southern Ocean was not a lifeless void, but a teeming ecosystem rich with plankton, krill, and strange creatures from the deep. These discoveries hinted that Antarctica was not a barren edge, but a powerhouse of global ocean life. The idea that events in Antarctic waters might affect fisheries and climates thousands of miles away planted the seed of a larger obsession. Antarctica mattered, even if it looked like nothing but ice. Soon after, nations began to organize more deliberate journeys into the southern latitudes, not just for glory, but for science. In 1892, the Dundee whaling fleet ventured south, reporting vast numbers of whales and seals. Their observations attracted not only hunters, but also scientists eager to understand how such abundance could thrive in seas that seemed otherwise inhospitable. Was Antarctica, hidden under its frozen cloak, more biologically important than anyone had realized? The first explicitly scientific Antarctica expedition of the modern age soon followed, the Belgian Antarctica expedition of 1897 to 1899, led by Adrien de Gerlache aboard the ship Belgica. Though remembered today for becoming the first expedition to overwinter in the Antarctic pack ice, what stands out in retrospect is the data the crew gathered. For over a year, as their ship lay trapped in the frozen sea, scientists and sailors recorded the movements of the ice, the behavior of penguins and seals, and the patterns of weather. Among them was a young Norwegian named Roald Amundsen, who would later become the first man to reach the South Pole. Another was the American physician Frederick Cook, who carefully documented the physical and psychological toll of the endless Antarctic night.
Together, these men revealed for the first time what it meant to live, not just to visit, but to endure in Antarctica. Their suffering and their survival proved that long-term study of the continent was possible. Meanwhile, other nations were watching closely. The late 19th century was an age of competition, where empires measured prestige in discoveries as much as in colonies. The British, the Germans, the Swedes, even the relatively young United States all recognized that Antarctica was a blank page on which their scientific achievements could be written. To explore Antarctica was to join the ranks of nations that dared to claim a role in shaping the knowledge of the future. By the turn of the century, a flurry of expeditions set sail. Each carried not only explorers, but also scientists, geologists, zoologists, meteorologists, men who packed microscopes alongside rifles, who carried specimen jars next to sledges. Their goal was not simply to be first, but to collect, to measure, to catalog. The British National Antarctica Expedition, 1901 to 1904, known as the Discovery Expedition under Robert Falcon Scott, exemplified this new approach. While Scott's personal ambition leaned toward pushing further south than anyone before, his ship carried laboratories, and his men hauled rocks back from glaciers as eagerly as they planted flags. The Discovery team collected thousands of specimens, from unfamiliar fish to new species of invertebrates, and made some of the earliest systematic studies of emperor penguins. Their notebooks brimmed with numbers, temperatures, wind speeds, depths, transforming vague mystery into measured knowledge. And yet, even as science advanced, the mysteries only deepened. Fossils recovered from Antarctic rocks suggested that the continent had once been lush with forests, its soil warm enough for ferns and tree ferns to flourish. How could this frozen desert once have been green? What did that mean for Earth's history of climate? No one could yet answer. Meanwhile, meteorological readings showed that Antarctica's weather patterns influenced winds and storms far beyond its borders. Could this frozen continent actually hold sway over the world's climate? Again, the answers were tantalizingly out of reach. This was the paradox that made Antarctica irresistible. Every fact uncovered hinted at a larger story hidden beneath the ice. To collect a penguin's egg was not just to add to biology, it was to wonder how life adapted to the harshest conditions. To chip a rock from a glacier was not just to weigh its minerals, it was to hold in your hand proof that the continent had once been warm. To measure the thickness of ice was not just to satisfy curiosity, it was to ask what might lie beneath, unseen for millions of years. The more Antarctica revealed, the more it concealed. Every expedition returned with treasures of knowledge, but also with the sense that they had merely scratched the surface of a secret far greater than they could imagine. And in this way, by the dawn of the 20th century, Antarctica had become more than a destination. It had become a symbol, the last blank chapter in Earth's history book, the one that demanded to be read. For the public, this transformation was intoxicating. Newspapers reported on Antarctic voyages with breathless excitement, portraying explorers not only as heroes but as pioneers of science. Tales of frostbite and shipwreck were mixed with sketches of strange animals and reports of new land sightings. Readers, safe in their warm homes, thrilled to imagine men standing at the edge of the world, uncovering secrets no one else had ever seen. And for governments, the attraction was just as strong. Prestige, knowledge, and perhaps even resources, all waiting in the white silence. It was this mixture of mystery, ambition, and the promise of scientific discovery that ushered in what we now call the heroic age of Antarctica exploration. An age when men risked everything not only to plant flags, but to ask questions. When ships sailed south not just with muskets and rations, but with microscopes and notebooks. An age when Antarctica ceased to be merely a blank on the map and became the greatest laboratory Earth had ever offered. Vast, harsh, and utterly unique. Looking back, we can see how inevitable it was. A world that had mapped nearly every coast and climbed nearly every mountain needed a new frontier. And Antarctica, with its endless ice and its silence that concealed so much, became that frontier. It promised glory for explorers, prestige for nations, and answers for scientists. It was the last great unknown, and in the late 19th century, humanity turned its full attention to it. This was the dawn before the heroic age, the moment when Antarctica changed from legend into obsession. It was no longer simply a question mark at the bottom of the globe. It was a place where history, science, and imagination converged, a continent that challenged human courage even as it promised to reveal the deepest secrets of our planet's past.
By the opening years of the 20th century, Antarctica was no longer just a blank space on a map. It had become an arena, a place where courage, obsession, and human fragility collided with a landscape that seemed designed to resist them. This was the so-called heroic age of Antarctic exploration, and though it is remembered in school books as a tale of flags and firsts, it was also something much stranger, a theater of secrets. Every expedition was a mixture of measured science and whispered legend, of triumph and tragedy, of discoveries that raised more questions than they answered. At its heart stood three names that still command awe: Robert Falcon Scott, Roald Amundsen, and Ernest Shackleton. Robert Falcon Scott, a British naval officer, carried with him both the discipline of his service and the weight of his nation's pride. In 1910, he launched the Terra Nova expedition, a mission that was part science, part conquest. The South Pole, that invisible point in the middle of an ice desert, had become a prize worth dying for. Scott's men hauled sledges across endless plains, recorded the thickness of glaciers, collected fossils, and sketched strange birds that seemed to belong more to prehistory than to the modern world. But as they pushed further south, the silence deepened into menace. Temperatures fell lower than instruments could measure. Winds shredded tents like paper. Rations dwindled. Still, they pressed on, driven by the belief that to reach the pole was to crown a century of British exploration. What Scott did not know was that a rival had already set his sights on the same prize. Roald Amundsen of Norway, who had studied the secrets of survival from Arctic peoples, approached the Antarctic challenge with a colder logic. He relied on dogs instead of men to haul supplies, skis instead of boots to cross the ice, efficiency instead of ceremony. Where Scott brought heavy sledges, Amundsen traveled light. Where Scott's team gathered data at every step, Amundsen raced. On December 14, 1911, Amundsen's small party reached the South Pole, planting the Norwegian flag in the frozen emptiness. For him, it was a triumph, the culmination of meticulous planning. For Scott, arriving a month later to find the flag already fluttering in the wind, it was devastation. The story of Scott's return has entered legend. Trapped by blizzards, weakened by frostbite, his team staggered northward across the ice. Their journals, written in frozen hands, tell of dwindling food, of men collapsing one by one, of the unbearable weight of disappointment. Just 11 miles from a supply depot, Scott and his last companions pitched their final tent. They died there, huddled together, leaving behind diaries that turned their failure into a testament of endurance. For Britain, Scott became a tragic hero, a symbol of sacrifice in pursuit of glory. For the world, his story raised a haunting question. Why risk everything for a point on the map, unless the point itself carried a secret weight? If Scott embodied tragedy and Amundsen efficiency, Ernest Shackleton represented resilience. His expeditions did not always achieve their goals,
but they revealed the human capacity to survive when the ice itself seemed determined to destroy. In 1914, he launched the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, hoping to cross the entire continent from sea to sea. His ship, the Endurance, never reached the shore. Crushed by pack ice in the Weddell Sea, it splintered and sunk, leaving Shackleton and his men stranded on drifting floes. For nearly 2 years they endured storms, hunger, and despair. Shackleton led them in lifeboats across treacherous waters to the desolate Elephant Island, and from there he and a handful of companions sailed 800 miles in an open boat to South Georgia. Against all odds, every man survived. What makes Shackleton's story so compelling is not merely survival, but the sense that the ice was more than environment. It was an antagonist, a presence. Diaries describe the sounds of pressure ridges buckling like cannon fire, of the seafloor booming beneath floes, of nights lit by auroras that seemed almost mocking. Shackleton himself spoke of a presence that walked beside his men during their final march across South Georgia's mountains, as if Antarctica was never entirely empty. Was this exhaustion speaking, or something stranger? The journals never explain. They only preserve the sense that Antarctica was watching. Even in their most scientific moments, these expeditions were tinged with mystery. Scott's men collected fossils of ancient plants, proving that Antarctica had once been green. Shackleton's geologists carried rocks across the ice even as starvation closed in, believing that what they held in their frozen hands were keys to Earth's past. Amundsen's meticulous notes on dogs, snow, and skies were not only records of travel, but fragments of a manual for survival in a land that had no mercy. Each expedition brought back knowledge, and yet the more they discovered, the stranger Antarctica became. How could a continent once filled with forests now be a desert of ice? How could creatures like penguins thrive in conditions that killed men? What else might lie beneath the glaciers, waiting? The heroic age is often remembered as a series of competitions, but in truth it was a dialogue between humanity and a continent that refused to be mastered. For Amundsen, Antarctica yielded to calculation. For Scott, it demanded a price in lives. For Shackleton, it offered survival only through unity and stubborn hope. Each story reveals not just human ambition, but the deeper mystery of a place that seems to strip explorers bare, reducing them to their most essential qualities: courage, despair, endurance. To this day, their names echo because Antarctica does not allow mediocrity. It magnifies character. The ice does not care for nations or flags, but it reveals what people are made of. That is why Scott's tragedy feels like sacrifice, why Amundsen's triumph feels like precision, why Shackleton's escape feels like a miracle. In their stories we see not just history, but myth being born in real time. Myth carved not by poets, but by frost, hunger, and the endless silence of the white continent. And through it all, the continent remained secretive. The expeditions answered some questions, but left others untouched. They proved Antarctica was a continent, not just ice. They proved it held fossils of lost forests. They proved it could kill men in days. But they did not prove why it mattered so much, why nations would spend fortunes, why men would give their lives. Perhaps that is the true secret of the heroic age. Antarctica lured humanity because it was not only the last blank spot on the globe, it was the last mirror, showing us ourselves against the backdrop of something vaster, colder, and older than we could comprehend.
By the middle of the 20th century, the narrative of Antarctica had shifted yet again. The days of desperate races to the South Pole were over. The flags were planted, the glory claimed, the tragedies immortalized. But as the heroic age faded into history, something far more enduring began to take shape. Antarctica was no longer seen merely as the stage of heroic suffering or national rivalry. It was beginning to be understood as something larger, a frozen library of Earth itself, an archive sealed in ice, holding records and secrets that no other continent could offer. And it was in this period, the 1940s through the late 20th century, that scientists began to uncover truths that made Antarctica not just the coldest place on Earth, but perhaps the most important. The first great revelation came with radar. In the years after World War II, technologies developed for war were turned to science. Aircraft equipped with radar altimeters flew over Antarctica's ice sheet, bouncing signals down through miles of frozen water. To the astonishment of researchers, the signals did not return a uniform echo. They revealed shapes, massive ridges, valleys, and even entire mountain ranges buried beneath the ice. Suddenly, the continent was no longer a flat white desert. It was a hidden landscape, a drowned world concealed under glaciers 2 and 3 miles thick. Among the most spectacular discoveries was the Gambortsev mountain range, as tall as the Alps, completely invisible beneath ice. Scientists realized they were standing on the surface of an entire hidden world. This was the first hint that Antarctica's secrets were geological as much as climatic. Fossils found earlier had already suggested that the land had once been green, but now it became possible to imagine the full story. These mountains, once forested and home to rivers, were now locked in silence. What had happened? What force had transformed a continent of life into a kingdom of ice? The answer, scientists began to realize, was that Antarctica was a time machine. Its ice sheets preserved layer upon layer of snow compacted over millions of years, each layer trapping bubbles of air, fragments of dust, and traces of Earth's atmosphere at the moment it fell. Drilling into that ice was like drilling into history. The first deep ice cores taken in the 1960s and 70s astonished researchers. Within cylinders of frozen water just a few inches wide lay records of climate stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Tiny bubbles preserved concentrations of carbon dioxide and other gases, showing how the planet's atmosphere had changed through ice ages and warm periods. For the first time, scientists could see not just guesses, but direct evidence of Earth's past climate. The implications were profound. It meant Antarctica could not only tell us where we had been, but also where we might be headed. The frozen continent was speaking, not in words, but in chemistry, in numbers carved in ice. But Antarctica's mysteries were not only geological. Another revelation came in the discovery of subglacial lakes. Radar and seismic studies showed that beneath the crushing weight of the ice sheet, liquid water existed, sealed away from the surface for millions of years, cut off from the sun, isolated from the outside world. The largest, Lake Vostok, lay beneath more than 2 miles of ice, as large as Lake Ontario. What could possibly live in such a place? Could microbes, perhaps even entirely unknown forms of life, survive in complete darkness, fed only by minerals and the faint warmth of Earth's crust? Scientists speculated that studying these lakes might not only reveal hidden ecosystems on Earth, but provide analogs for extraterrestrial life, such as the oceans beneath the ice of Jupiter's moon Europa. Once again, Antarctica blurred the line between geography and cosmic mystery. Even more astonishing were the signs that Antarctica had once been connected to other continents. Geological studies suggested that millions of years ago,
Antarctica had been part of Gondwana, a supercontinent that included Africa, South America, India, and Australia. Fossils of plants and animals found in Antarctic rocks matched those in far-off lands. The implication was staggering. Antarctica had not always been isolated at the bottom of the globe. It had once been central, green, alive. And if it had changed so dramatically in the past, what might its ice be hiding about the story of life itself? The more scientists uncovered, the more Antarctica seemed to serve as Earth's ultimate archive. Volcanic ash layers and ice cores recorded eruptions thousands of miles away. Trapped pollen revealed winds that had carried plant life across oceans. Dust from the Sahara Desert, frozen into Antarctic snow, showed how climates on one side of the planet were linked to the other. Every drill into the ice was not just into Antarctica, but into Earth's memory. And yet, alongside this excitement came unease. If Antarctica preserved the history of Earth's climate, it also warned of its fragility. Ice cores showed that whenever greenhouse gases rose, so too did global temperatures, and whenever they fell, ice advanced. The rhythms of warming and cooling were written plainly in the ice, cycles stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. For scientists in the late 20th century, this was no longer just history, it was prophecy. The ice was telling us what happens when the atmosphere changes. Antarctica was not only a frozen archive, but also a warning system. At the same time, the continent's sheer remoteness made every discovery feel like an unveiling of a secret. Consider the dry valleys of Antarctica, where the landscape looks more like Mars than Earth, rocky, barren, almost without snow. In those valleys, scientists discovered microbes surviving in conditions once thought impossible. In the frozen lakes, they found bacteria clinging to life beneath layers of ice. Every one of these findings fed the suspicion that Antarctica was more than it seemed, a hidden refuge of life, a test case for survival at the extremes. Even rumors and exaggerations played their part. Stories circulated about magnetic anomalies beneath the ice, strange readings that equipment could not explain. Some spoke of enormous caverns carved by geothermal heat, spaces so large that aircraft could fly within them. Were these simply natural formations, or could they conceal deeper secrets? While mainstream science explains such anomalies in terms of geology, the mystery only grew in the public imagination. Because Antarctica is so inaccessible, every unanswered question seems to invite conspiracy. And in truth, secrecy has always surrounded the continent. Nations guarded their data carefully during the Cold War, when both the United States and the Soviet Union operated massive bases. Scientific research often overlapped with strategic interest. Satellites peered down at the ice, mapping not just glaciers but potential landing fields. In the haze of politics and rivalry, Antarctica's scientific secrets seemed intertwined with human ones. What was being measured? What was being withheld? The Antarctic Treaty of 1959, which declared the continent a place for peace and science, calmed some of these suspicions. But even today, whispers remain that beneath the ice there is more than just geology. There is something we are not told. As a historian might say, what makes Antarctica so compelling is this tension. It is at once the most studied and the most secret place on Earth. We have drilled, flown, mapped, and measured, yet vast regions remain untouched. We have learned that its ice records Earth's climate, that its mountains and valleys rival any elsewhere, that life may persist in its hidden lakes. But each discovery, rather than closing the case, opens 100 more. By the late 20th century, Antarctica had ceased to be merely the white void of early maps. It had become Earth's hidden archive,
a continent whose silence was not emptiness, but storage, where layer upon layer of history lay waiting. And perhaps that is its greatest secret of all. Not that it resists us, but that it remembers everything. Every storm, every shift of the atmosphere, every flicker of life across millions of years is recorded there, locked in ice. It is not just a place, it is Earth's memory, preserved at the bottom of the world. And the question, as we peer deeper into its secrets, is no longer simply what will we find, it is also what will we do with what Antarctica tells us. For the ice speaks quietly, but with authority. It reminds us that climates shift, that continents change, that life survives in ways we never expect. It reminds us that the greatest cover-up on Earth is not a human conspiracy at all, but the planet itself, burying its history beneath silence, waiting for those persistent enough and patient enough to listen.
By the middle of the 20th century, Antarctica had already shifted in meaning several times. Once it had been a myth, Terra Australis Incognita, a land imagined into existence. Then it became a stage for adventurers in the heroic age, men who gambled their lives against blizzards and starvation. Later, it revealed itself as an archive of Earth's deep past, its ice cores whispering stories of climates long forgotten. But as the Second World War ended and the Cold War began, Antarctica entered yet another role, no longer just a frozen archive, but a potential chessboard in a world divided between superpowers. Suddenly, this vast, silent continent, with no permanent inhabitants and no natural borders, became the focus of geopolitical intrigue. The irony is that Antarctica itself had not changed. The glaciers still groaned, the katabatic winds still howled down from the polar plateau, penguins still huddled together against the storms. Yet from Washington, Moscow, London, and Buenos Aires, the continent seemed to glow with new importance. The generals and diplomats, Antarctica was not merely ice. It was territory, resources, and perhaps, in a nuclear age, a strategic vantage point. Hints of this new perception had already emerged during the Second World War. In 1938-39, Nazi Germany launched an expedition to Queen Maud Land, dropping aluminum swastikas from aircraft to stake a symbolic claim. Britain, in turn, responded with Operation Tabarin during the war, establishing small but permanent bases on the Antarctic Peninsula. Officially, they were meant to monitor German activity in the South Atlantic. Unofficially, they were also meant to assert British sovereignty in a region increasingly claimed by Argentina and Chile. Even before the Cold War began, the White Continent was being carved into overlapping wedges of ambition. After 1945, these tensions escalated. The United States, emerging from the war as a global superpower, suddenly showed unprecedented interest. In 1946-47, Admiral Richard E. Byrd led Operation High Jump, the largest Antarctic expedition ever mounted, involving more than 4,000 men, 13 ships, and a fleet of aircraft. Officially, the mission was for scientific research and testing military equipment in extreme conditions. But its sheer scale, far greater than required for science alone, sent signals to the rest of the world. Antarctica was not to be ignored. In the age of atomic weapons and intercontinental strategy, even the frozen South could matter. From the Soviet Union's perspective, this was a provocation. Although the USSR had been slow to show interest in Antarctica before the war, it now began to assert itself. By the 1950s, Soviet expeditions had established massive inland stations,
including the forbidding Vostok base, situated near the coldest recorded place on Earth. Soviet scientists conducted pioneering studies of magnetism, seismology, and glaciology, but their presence also served a clear political purpose: to show that Moscow, too, had a claim to the world's last unclaimed land. Meanwhile, other countries, Britain, Argentina, Chile, Norway, Australia, New Zealand, expanded their claims. The result was a continent crisscrossed by lines on maps, many of them overlapping, some of them contradictory. The Antarctic Peninsula, for example, was claimed simultaneously by Britain, Argentina, and Chile, each building bases within sight of the others. Flags were raised, supply huts built, maps redrawn. In a region where no permanent population existed to arbitrate disputes, symbolism mattered. Every hut, every patrol, every weather station was a statement of ownership. Yet here is where the Antarctic paradox deepened. At the very moment when political rivalry was sharpest, scientific cooperation was also blossoming. The 1950s saw the planning of the International Geophysical Year, a global scientific campaign running from 1957 to 1958. For Antarctica, the IGY was transformative. 12 nations, including the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, Japan, and several others, agreed to collaborate on massive research efforts. Dozens of new bases were built across the continent. Aircraft flew aerial surveys, drilling began on ice cores, and instruments recorded data on weather, seismology, and the aurora australis. For scientists, it was a dream. Resources poured into research on a scale never before possible. For governments, it was also strategy cloaked in science. To build bases was to build presence. To fly planes was to map territory. To drill ice was to stake claims. In Antarctica, science and politics were inseparable. Every measurement of snowfall doubled as evidence of national presence, and every map line drawn by a survey aircraft was a subtle declaration of control. Yet here is where the Antarctic paradox deepened. At the very moment when political rivalry was sharpest, scientific cooperation was also blossoming. The 1950s saw the planning of the International Geophysical Year, a global scientific campaign running from 1957 to 1958. For Antarctica, the IGY was transformative. 12 nations, including the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, Japan, and several others, agreed to collaborate on massive research efforts. Dozens of new bases were built across the continent. Aircraft flew aerial surveys. Drilling began on ice cores, and instruments recorded data on weather, seismology, and the aurora australis. For scientists, it was a dream. Resources poured into research on a scale never before possible. For governments, it was also strategy cloaked in science. To build bases was to build presence. To fly planes was to map territory. To drill ice was to stake claims. In Antarctica, science and politics were inseparable. Every measurement of snowfall doubled as evidence of national presence, and every map line drawn by a survey aircraft was a subtle declaration of control. And yet, the IGY revealed something remarkable. Even in the depths of the Cold War, when suspicion poisoned relations elsewhere, in Antarctica, scientists from rival nations often worked together. Americans visited Soviet stations. Russians shared meteorological data with the British. Japanese researchers exchanged specimens with Chileans. The ice, indifferent to ideology, forced cooperation. To survive in temperatures below -70, men had to rely on one another. In that sense, Antarctica became a strange sanctuary, an arena of rivalry, yes, but also of fragile unity. The culmination of this paradox came in 1959 with the signing of the Antarctic Treaty. In Washington, representatives of 12 nations agreed on something almost unprecedented, that Antarctica would be dedicated to peace and science. Military activity was banned. Nuclear testing was prohibited. Sovereignty claims were frozen, neither recognized nor denied, leaving the continent in a legal limbo where no nation truly ruled. Instead, the focus would be on research, with findings shared openly across borders. In a divided world, the Antarctic Treaty was and remains an extraordinary achievement. But treaties do not erase suspicion, they only contain it. Throughout the Cold War, whispers persisted. What were the Soviets really doing at Vostok Station, deep in the interior? Why did the Americans build airstrips capable of landing heavy bombers, if not for military use? What lay under the ice that attracted so much attention? Minerals? Oil? Uranium? Or was it simply the allure of territory, the instinct to plant a flag even in a place where no one could live permanently? For conspiracy theorists, Antarctica became fertile ground. Rumors of secret bases, hidden technologies, even ancient ruins circulated endlessly, amplified by the fact that so few people could verify anything. In the shadows of superpower rivalry, the White Continent became a mirror for human fears and fantasies. And yet, beneath the secrecy and suspicion, real scientific miracles unfolded. Seismographs revealed the deep structure of the Earth's crust beneath Antarctica. Ice cores drilled in the 1960s and 70s began to show patterns of climate stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Satellites launched in the 1970s mapped the ice sheet with precision, confirming its vastness and fragility. By the late Cold War, scientists knew that the fate of Antarctica's ice was not just a regional concern, but a global one. If even part of the West Antarctic ice...
For centuries, Antarctica was defined by what could be seen: endless plains of white, cliffs of ice glowing blue under the sun, mountains half buried in glaciers, and a silence so complete it seemed eternal. But as the 20th century moved into its second half, a profound shift occurred. The continent was no longer just what met the eye. Technology, radar, satellites, seismic instruments, drilling rigs, allowed humans to pierce the veil of ice, to glimpse what lay hidden beneath. And what they found was nothing less than astonishing. A secret world concealed under miles of frozen water, a world of mountains, valleys, rivers, lakes, even possible life forms, all sealed away for millions of years. Antarctica, once imagined as an empty wasteland, was revealed instead as one of the most complex and mysterious landscapes on Earth. The first breakthrough came with the discovery of the Gombertsev Mountains. In the late 1950s, during the International Geophysical Year, Soviet scientists used seismic soundings to map the subsurface of the East Antarctic ice sheet. What they found stunned them. Beneath nearly 2 miles of solid ice lay a mountain range as tall as the European Alps, stretching for hundreds of miles across the heart of the continent. These were not small hills, but towering peaks, valleys, and ridges, preserved in secret darkness. To this day, they remain unseen by human eyes, their sharp summits never touched, their valleys never walked. It was as if an entire continent had been placed atop another. How had they formed? Why were they there? And how had they survived under the crushing weight of ice? Questions multiplied, turning Antarctica into not just a frozen desert, but a puzzle of deep time. At the same time,
ice cores began to change how humanity understood Earth's history. When scientists drilled into the ice, extracting long cylinders that reached thousands of feet into the sheet, they discovered they were holding time itself. Each thin layer of snow, compressed over millennia, trapped tiny bubbles of air, dust, and even microscopic pollen grains. Examining these bubbles revealed the composition of Earth's atmosphere at the very moment that snow had fallen. Suddenly, Antarctica was not just a place, it was a diary of climate stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. The results were shocking. Ice cores showed cycles of ice ages and warm periods repeating like clockwork, linked to variations in Earth's orbit and the concentration of greenhouse gases. They revealed that when carbon dioxide rose, so too did temperatures, and when it fell, ice advanced. For the first time, scientists had direct evidence, not guesses, not theories, but records that tied human futures to ancient rhythms. The white silence of Antarctica was not silent at all. It was a warning, written in frozen air. Yet even as these discoveries unfolded, new mysteries appeared. Radar surveys revealed vast networks of valleys beneath the ice, some as deep as the Grand Canyon, carved long ago by rivers that no longer flowed. Were these relics of a warmer Antarctica, or did they still channel hidden streams today? Then came the discovery of subglacial lakes, bodies of liquid water sealed beneath miles of ice, warmed by geothermal heat and pressure. The largest, Lake Vostok, lay beneath more than 2 miles of solid ice, as large as Lake Ontario, undisturbed for millions of years. The thought was breathtaking. Entire ecosystems might exist in those lakes, cut off from sunlight since before humans evolved, evolving in isolation under crushing pressure and eternal night. When Russian scientists finally drilled into Lake Vostok in the early 21st century, they found microbial life in water samples. Whether these were contaminants or true natives remains debated, but the possibility alone was extraordinary. If life could survive in such conditions, dark, cold, isolated, what might that mean for our search for life elsewhere? Was Antarctica not only Earth's last frontier, but also a model for the oceans hidden beneath the ice of Jupiter's Europa or Saturn's Enceladus? And there were other surprises. Some subglacial lakes showed signs of circulation, with water moving beneath the ice sheets in hidden rivers. These rivers, invisible from the surface, may act as lubricants, accelerating the flow of glaciers toward the sea. In other words, what happens in Antarctica's invisible underworld might determine the stability of the entire ice sheet, and with it, the fate of global sea levels. Suddenly, the hidden world was not just a curiosity, it was directly tied to humanity's future. But the mysteries did not end there. Magnetic surveys revealed anomalies beneath the ice, areas where readings made little sense, as if something massive and unusual lay hidden. Some could be explained by geology, but others remained debated. Conspiracy theorists seized on these findings, imagining ancient civilizations, alien artifacts, or secret bases concealed beneath the ice. Serious scientists, of course, stick to geology, but even they admit that much remains unknown. And in Antarctica, the unknown always feels heavier, more charged, as if the continent delights in reminding us how little we truly understand. Even the ice itself is mysterious. Though it appears static, it is in constant motion, flowing slowly toward the sea like frozen rivers. Satellite imagery shows glaciers advancing and retreating, sometimes surging forward with unexplained speed. Beneath them, liquid water lubricates the bedrock, yet we still do not know how stable the great ice sheets truly are. Some scientists warn that parts of West Antarctica may already be in irreversible retreat, a process that could raise global seas by several meters. If true, then Antarctica's greatest secret is not in its past, but in its future. a future that could reshape every coastline on Earth. And yet, amid the warnings and data, there is wonder. Imagine standing on the polar plateau at Vostok Station, the coldest recorded place on Earth. The temperature drops below minus 80 degrees Celsius. The air is so dry it burns the throat. The sky above glitters with stars sharper than anywhere else on the planet, unclouded by humidity. Beneath your boots, more than 2 miles of ice separate you from a hidden lake where unknown life may stir. Around you, instruments hum, quietly measuring magnetic fields, seismic tremors, and cosmic rays. In that moment, Antarctica feels like not Earth, but like another planet, one we happen to share. That is the paradox. Antarctica is at once intimately part of our world and utterly alien. It records our climate, yet it defies our presence. It hides mountains, valleys, rivers, and lakes, yet offers them up only through instruments, never through eyes. It is, quite literally, the most secretive place on Earth, a continent that exists twice, once in the dazzling white we see, and once in the hidden landscapes we can only imagine. For scientists, this duality is irresistible. For dreamers, it is intoxicating. And for all of us, it is humbling. Antarctica's hidden world reminds us that even now, in an age of satellites and instant data, the planet still holds secrets vast enough to dwarf our knowledge. Beneath its veil of white lies a parallel world, untouched, unseen, and still waiting. And so, the story of Antarctica in the scientific age is not just a story of discovery. It is a story of deepening mystery. Every answer about mountains, ice, lakes, or microbes leads to another question. Every revelation about the past sparks a warning about the future. Antarctica is not just the coldest continent, it is the most enigmatic. A frozen library, a hidden underworld, a stage where geology, climate, and biology converge into secrets we are only beginning to uncover.
In the long story of human history, there is almost no land that has not been claimed, conquered, divided, or sold. Borders have shifted, flags have risen and fallen, and empires have carved up oceans, mountains, and rivers. But there is one exception, one place where this ancient habit of possession has faltered: Antarctica. A continent larger than Europe and Australia combined, yet no nation can call it its own. Why? How did the last frontier of Earth become the only landmass without a sovereign ruler? And perhaps more intriguingly, what does that say about the secrets it holds? The first attempts at ownership were predictable. As soon as sailors glimpsed ice cliffs in the early 19th century, nations rushed to draw lines on maps. Britain claimed a vast sector stretching from the South Pole to the Antarctic Peninsula. Argentina and Chile declared overlapping territories, arguing their proximity gave them natural rights. Norway laid claim to Queen Maud Land. Australia and New Zealand, as outposts of the British Empire, each marked their sectors. Even France planted its tricolour on Adelie Land. By the 1940s, nearly the entire continent had been claimed, at least on paper. The problem? Almost every claim overlapped with someone else's, and almost none could be enforced in practice. Unlike Africa, Asia, or the Americas, Antarctica refused to yield to empire. Its ice erased footprints, its storms destroyed huts, its remoteness made supply nearly impossible. Planting a flag was one thing, maintaining control was another. No farms could be established, no permanent towns built, no armies stationed. Antarctica seemed to reject human ownership by the sheer force of its geography. And yet, the claims persisted, each one a statement of ambition rather than reality.
Then came the Cold War, when ambition turned to suspicion. Operation High Jump in 1946-47, with its vast American fleet, alarmed rivals. Soviet bases deep in the interior unnerved the West. Rumors of secret military projects, of uranium deposits beneath the ice, of strategic airfields carved into glaciers. To some, Antarctica looked less like a wilderness and more like a prize, perhaps the greatest prize of all, untouched and unspoiled, waiting for whoever had the will to seize it. But here lay the danger. If one nation attempted to enforce its claim, others would inevitably respond. The White Continent risked becoming a battlefield. And then something extraordinary happened. In 1959, 12 nations, including the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, Japan, and others, signed the Antarctic Treaty. Its terms were radical. All military activity on the continent was banned. Nuclear tests were prohibited. Territorial claims were frozen, neither recognized nor denied, but suspended. Most astonishingly of all, the entire continent was dedicated to science and peace. Any country could conduct research there, but no country could own it. In the middle of the Cold War, when Berlin was divided and nuclear missiles stood on hair-trigger alert, humanity agreed to share an entire continent. But treaties, as history shows, are never just words. They are also shadows of unspoken fears and ambitions. Why did nations agree so quickly to renounce sovereignty? Was it idealism, or was it suspicion? Some argue that Antarctica's climate made ownership impractical anyway, so nations preferred to avoid conflict over a prize they could not yet exploit. Others suggest the real motive was secrecy, that Antarctica's resources, from oil to rare minerals, were too vast to divide safely, and so the best option was to postpone the question. Still others whisper that what lies beneath the ice is more than resources, that ancient fossils, hidden lakes, mountains taller than the Alps, meteorites from Mars, all these have been found beneath the ice. What else might be buried there, waiting? If ownership means control, then whoever owned Antarctica would control more than land. They would control Earth's deepest archive, its climate memory, its hidden biology. Such knowledge might be too powerful, too consequential to trust to a single nation. Better, perhaps, to bury it in treaties and bureaucracy, to keep it shared or hidden until the world is ready. And so Antarctica remains the exception. In a world divided by borders, it has none. In a world shaped by conquest, it has never been conquered. In a world where possession is power, it has remained unpossessed. It is, in a sense, the last secret of geopolitics, a continent too large to ignore, too dangerous to divide, too strange to control. When future historians look back, they may see in the Antarctic Treaty not just a political agreement, but a glimpse of something rare. Humanity, for once, choosing restraint. Whether by necessity or wisdom, the nations of the world decided that some places are too vast, too silent, too mysterious to be owned. But as the ice melts and technology advances, the temptation will return. What then? Will the frozen veil remain unbroken, or will nations once again reach for possession? That is the true unanswered question of Antarctica, the secret not of its past, but of its future.
Antarctica, more than any other place on Earth, seems designed to invite speculation. It is vast, empty, almost impossible to reach, and what lies beneath its ice remains hidden from view. Scientists can probe it with satellites and radar, but the average person will never set foot there, never see its interior, never touch the stones or waters concealed 2 miles down. And so, in this vacuum of direct experience, imagination flourishes. Where knowledge is scarce, mystery multiplies. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Antarctica has become a magnet not only for researchers, but also for storytellers, conspiracy theorists, and dreamers, each convinced the continent hides something extraordinary. The myths begin with the simple fact of secrecy. Unlike other regions of the world where tourists wander freely and journalists record events daily, Antarctica is restricted. To go there requires permits, sponsorship, and logistical support. Planes fly in only at certain times of year. Bases are tightly managed, their work often hidden behind layers of technical jargon and scientific reports few will read. To outsiders, this looks suspicious. Why, some ask, is an entire continent closed off? What are they hiding beneath the ice? The official answer, environmental protection, safety, logistics, makes sense. But for those inclined to mistrust, it only deepens the intrigue. One of the most persistent legends involves maps. The Piri-Reis map of 1513, often cited, appears to show a southern coastline resembling Antarctica centuries before it was discovered. Some insist this means ancient civilizations knew of the continent when it was ice-free, possessing knowledge lost to us. Scholars explain that the map is a patchwork of earlier charts, distorted and misinterpreted. But to those who want mystery, the possibility that someone, somehow, mapped Antarctica long before Europeans is irresistible. If true, it would mean human history is deeper and stranger than we admit. Another cluster of myths arises from the Second World War. In 1938-39, Nazi Germany sent an expedition to Antarctica, claiming a portion of Queen Maud Land. Decades later, this routine mission blossomed in popular imagination into a sprawling narrative. Secret Nazi bases carved under the ice, U-boats fleeing south after 1945, even experiments with advanced technologies hidden in frozen caverns. Operation High Jump, the massive U.S. expedition of 1946-47, has often been folded into these tales. Though officially it was a training and research exercise, conspiracy theorists suggest it was a battle against hidden Nazi remnants or even something more exotic. None of these stories hold historical evidence, but they persist, fueled by the continent's remoteness and the drama of wartime secrecy. Then there are the magnetic anomalies. In the 1970s, surveys detected unusual readings in certain parts of East Antarctica, most famously near Wilkes Land. Geologists suggest these anomalies reflect massive impact craters, perhaps from asteroids, or dense mineral deposits buried beneath the ice. But in the popular imagination, they became something else: evidence of structures, ruins, or even buried spacecraft. Online forums buzz with speculation that the ice conceals not geology, but archaeology, perhaps the remnants of a civilization older than recorded history. Scientists smile politely and continue their measurements, but the idea endures because Antarctica's silence is fertile ground for wonder. More recently, satellite images have fueled new whispers. Photos of geometric shapes in the ice, often the result of natural patterns or equipment glitches, are interpreted as buildings, runways, or entrances to hidden bases. Shadows cast by mountains look like pyramids, and soon the internet proclaims Antarctic pyramids. Explanations are simple: erosion, wind, ice. But the allure of an ancient civilization buried under glaciers is far stronger than geology for many. If Egypt can have pyramids in the desert, why not Antarctica under the ice? Even the discovery of subglacial lakes, like Lake Vostok, has been swept into conspiracy.
Scientists study them as unique ecosystems, isolated for millions of years, potential analogs for extraterrestrial oceans. Conspiracy theorists, however, suggest stranger possibilities: secret experiments, alien bases, gateways to hidden worlds. The very fact that drilling into such lakes is tightly controlled to prevent contamination feeds suspicion. If they are only lakes, critics ask, why the secrecy? In reality, the precautions are for science, but suspicion often grows where information is scarce. Another theme in modern myths is the idea that Antarctica hides catastrophic truths. Some claim that melting ice will reveal long-buried ruins, forcing humanity to rewrite history. Others insist that governments already know what lies beneath and are covering it up to maintain control. Still others imagine Antarctica as the site of hidden portals, entry points to subterranean worlds or dimensions. To skeptics, these are fanciful tales, but to believers, they are signs that Antarctica is the greatest cover-up of all, the place where reality itself is hidden from ordinary eyes. What is striking is how these myths echo the continent's scientific discoveries. When radar revealed mountains beneath the ice, myths spoke of hidden cities. When cores revealed ancient climates, myths imagined tropical civilizations. When lakes were found, myths turned them into secret laboratories. Reality and imagination dance together, each feeding the other. Antarctica, more than any other place, seems to blur the boundary between science and story. And perhaps that is the heart of its mystery. Antarctica does not need aliens or lost empires to be extraordinary. Its true secrets, the Gamberts mountains, the ice cores that record 1,000,000 years of climate, the hidden lakes and strange microbes are wondrous enough. Yet because so few people can see them firsthand, the line between fact and fiction remains thin. A photo of a shadow becomes a pyramid. A magnetic reading becomes a buried spacecraft. The continent itself invites such leaps. It is too silent, too remote, too empty to defend itself against human imagination. In the end, the myths and conspiracies tell us as much about ourselves as about Antarctica. They reveal our hunger for mystery in an age of information, our suspicion that the world still hides secrets beyond our reach, our unease with blank spaces. Antarctica is the last canvas onto which we can project those desires. Whether we see it as a frozen library of climate, a testing ground of science, or the hiding place of ancient civilizations, it reflects our deepest impulses to question, to doubt, to imagine. And perhaps that is why Antarctica will always remain a land of whispers. Even as satellites map it in exquisite detail, even as scientists publish careful data, there will always be the sense that something lies beneath, just out of reach, just beyond proof. A secret under the ice.
When we think of Antarctica, we often imagine it as eternal, a frozen desert that has always been and always will be, a land immune to the passage of time. But nothing on Earth is truly timeless, and Antarctica is no exception. In fact, the very thing that makes it appear unchanging, the ice, is itself in motion, shifting, flowing, melting, and freezing again. And now, in our century, the pace of change is accelerating. The greatest secret of Antarctica may not lie in its hidden past or its concealed valleys, but in its uncertain future. The question is no longer simply what Antarctica has been, but what it will become, and how humanity will respond. The first challenge is the ice itself. Antarctica holds around 70% of all the freshwater on Earth, locked away in glaciers up to 4 kilometers thick. If all that ice were to melt, sea levels would rise by more than 60 meters, drowning coastlines, swallowing cities, and reshaping continents. Of course, no one expects such total melting in the near future, but even small changes matter. The West Antarctic ice sheet, less stable than the vast East, is already showing signs of retreat. Glaciers like Thwaites, nicknamed the Doomsday Glacier, are thinning and accelerating toward the sea. If they collapse, sea levels could rise by several meters, enough to displace hundreds of millions of people. The world's ports, from New York to Shanghai, would feel the consequences of decisions made far from Antarctica, in cities that never see icebergs. At the same time, the continent's climate is shifting in ways both subtle and profound. Satellite records show that parts of the Antarctic Peninsula are warming faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. Shelves of floating ice, massive platforms the size of small countries, have shattered within days, sending shockwaves through the scientific community. Each collapse is a reminder that Antarctica is not inert, but dynamic, responding to changes in the atmosphere and the ocean. The white silence is not as silent as it appears. Beneath it, forces are moving. This brings us to the great paradox of the Antarctic future. It is both priceless and vulnerable. On one hand, Antarctica's ice is an irreplaceable record of Earth's climate, a frozen library that tells us how the planet has changed for nearly 1 million years. To lose it to melting would be to lose our best archive of the past. On the other hand, the continent is also seen by some as a treasure chest of resources, oil, gas, coal, and minerals that remain untapped only because of remoteness and treaties. As technology advances and demand grows, the temptation to exploit these hidden riches will increase. For now, the Antarctic Treaty bans resource extraction, but treaties can be broken or rewritten. The question is not only scientific, but moral. Should we ever disturb the last untouched continent? There is also the matter of biology. The seas around Antarctica, rich with krill, sustain whales, seals, and seabirds. These ecosystems are delicate, balanced on temperatures and currents. Already, commercial fishing fleets push the limits, harvesting krill for food and supplements. What happens if demand continues to rise? Will humanity treat the Southern Ocean as it has treated so many others, as a resource to be drained, or will we protect it as a rare sanctuary? The fate of whales, penguins, and even the smallest plankton may depend on how seriously we take Antarctica's role in global ecology. And then there is the unknown. Beneath the ice lie subglacial lakes, sealed off for millions of years. We have only begun to touch them, and what we find there, microbes, strange chemistries, perhaps even forms of life adapted to complete darkness, could reshape how we think about biology. But drilling into such places risks contamination, altering ecosystems before we even know they exist. The decision of whether to explore or to preserve is one of the great ethical dilemmas of Antarctic science. Do we seek knowledge at any cost, or do we accept that some secrets should remain hidden? Geopolitics, too, shadows the continent's future. The Antarctic Treaty has held since 1959, but it is not eternal. In 2048, key provisions may be renegotiated. By then, the world will likely be more crowded, more resource-hungry, and more divided. Will nations continue to honor the spirit of peace and science, or will competition for oil, gas, and minerals break the fragile truce? Already, bases are multiplying, aircraft fly more missions, and satellites scan every ridge and crevice. Officially, it is all science. Unofficially, it is presence.
and presence in geopolitics is power. For ordinary people, Antarctica's future is often invisible. We live in cities, far from icebergs, far from katabatic winds. But the truth is that every one of us is linked to it. The ice controls sea levels, which control coastlines. Its winds and currents influence weather across the globe. Its frozen archive records the rhythms of climate that shape agriculture, migration, and civilization. To think of Antarctica as distant is to misunderstand it. It is not remote. It is central. Central to the planet's balance, central to our own survival. But perhaps the deepest question is not scientific or political, it is philosophical. What do we do as a species when we face a land that resists ownership, that holds secrets too vast to measure, that challenges our usual instincts to conquer and consume? Do we learn restraint, preserving it as a shared trust? Or do we repeat our old patterns, carving, drilling, and exploiting until nothing is left? Antarctica's greatest test may not be of climate or geology, but of us. In lectures at Harvard and other universities, professors sometimes frame it this way: Antarctica is a mirror. It shows us ourselves more clearly than any other continent. When explorers came, they brought both courage and arrogance. When scientists came, they brought both patience and ambition. When nations came, they brought both cooperation and rivalry. The ice reflected it all. Now, as the ice melts, the reflection becomes sharper. Do we see greed or wisdom? Do we see division or unity? Do we see a future shaped by warnings ignored or by lessons learned? What makes the Antarctic future so compelling and so unsettling is that it is not written. The past we can read in ice cores, the present we can measure with satellites, but the future is ours to decide. And it will be decided not only in laboratories and treaties, but in the choices of billions of people far from the ice. Will we burn the fuels that accelerate melting? Will we honor treaties that protect the continent? Will we treat its oceans as sanctuaries or as fisheries? Each decision, small or large, ripples southward, reaching the last frontier. So perhaps the real secret of Antarctica is this: the continent is not passive, it reacts. If we warm the atmosphere, the glaciers move. If we pollute the oceans, the ecosystems shift. If we reach for its resources, the treaty trembles. Antarctica, silent and immense, answers us, not with words, but with ice breaking, seas rising, and winds changing. It is the quietest continent, and yet it speaks the loudest, because its language is global.